It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Leonard Peltier, with just moments left before he left office, Joe Biden, writes CBS News, commuted the life sentence. They call him indigenous activists. It's a murder. In Native American. Leonard Peltier, who was convicted in 1975 for killing 2 FBI agents. Peltier was denied parole as recently as this July. He wasn't eligible for parole until 2026. He was serving life in prison for the deaths of the agents during a standoff on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. He will transition to home confinement, Biden said in his statement. The hell is going on? This guy is sick. I'm so glad this guy's broomed out of there. President Biden took an enormous step toward healing and reconciliation with the Native American people in this country, Peltier's former attorney, Kevin Sharp, said in a statement Monday. What? So the Native American population backed Peltier? No, they didn't. It took nearly 50 years to acknowledge the injustice of Leonard Peltier's conviction and continued incarceration. But with President Biden's act of mercy, Leonard can finally return to his reservation and live out his remaining days. What do you think of that, folks? An enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa in North Dakota, Peltier was active in the American Indian movement, which began in the 60s as local organizers in Minneapolis that grappled with issues of police brutality. The movement grabbed headlines in 73 when it took over the village of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation, leading to a 71-day standoff with federal agents. I remember this. Tensions between the movement and the government remained high for years. On June 26, 1975, FBI agents came to Pine Ridge to serve arrest warrants amid battles over native treaty rights and self-determination. This was a radical, violent group. After being injured in a shootout, agents Jack Kohler and Ronald Williams were shot in the head at close range, the FBI said. Also killed in the shootout was American Indian Movement member Joseph Stuntz. 2 other movement members, Robert Robideau and Dino Butler, were acquitted of killing Collier and Williams. After fleeing to Canada and being extradited to the United States, Peltier was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. These agents were shot in the head as they were wounded. And sentenced in 1977 to life imprisonment, despite defense claims that evidence against him had been falsified. And it goes on. This is what I mean. You had the Puerto Rican terrorists who shot up the Capitol building, who blew people up, and they were all taken care of by Clinton and Obama. You have this, in my view, murder, and taken care of by Joe Biden. Other murders in the federal system, 37 to count, who were taken care of by Joe Biden. We have to sit here and talk about January 6th, like there was an insurrection, an armed insurrection where these people were murdering people. That never happened. And there's more. The AP, in one of his first acts as president, one of his final acts, I think is meant, Joe Biden pardoned Dr. Anthony Fauci, retired General Mark Milley, members of the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol, in an extraordinary use of executive power to guard against potential revenge, he said, by the new administration. Let me be clear about this. Let me be very clear about this. The reason Fauci needed to be investigated criminally is because of the funding of this lab, and then the subsequent cover-ups of what this lab had done. Mark Milley undermined the commander-in-chief in his speaking with the Communist Party military behind Trump's back, among other things. Now, these investigations should continue, whether they be criminal or congressional. They should continue so we can get to the bottom of everything and get all the facts out. And if there's lying during the course of these investigations, then these individuals are still subject to prosecution subsequently, depending on what the pardon document says, quite frankly. And then, of course, he pardoned every member of the January 6th committee. So all the destruction of evidence, that is obstruction of justice because they turn this information over. They turn the information over to the Department of Justice and the rogue unconstitutional prosecutor, Jack Smith, for the purpose of influencing criminal investigation. But if you're going to do that, that's not protected by the speech and debate clause, as obviously Biden and his lawyers know, as I've explained for months, which is why they went ahead and sought to protect them. Then what did he do? Literally, 14 minutes before the clock ticked to noon, before Donald Trump became president, which means he signed these pardons for his family, and he signed them to take effect 14 minutes before he was leaving office as the non-president. USA Today, President Joe Biden pardoned his brother, James Biden, and other relatives for unspecified crimes, a similar last-minute move to protect his family from potential investigation is when he pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, for gun and tax convictions. If this doesn't demonstrate what a crooked family this is, then nothing does. This will truly go down in history as one of the great scandals. It truly will. Biden said he pardoned his brother and other relatives, James, his wife, Sarah Jones Biden, sister Valerie Biden Owens, her husband, John Owens, and another brother, Francis Biden. How many of these bastards are there? Because of concerns about baseless and politically motivated investigations wreak havoc on their lives, safety, financial security. That's hilarious. The guy that oversaw lawfare against Donald Trump, even when individuals have done nothing wrong and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage their reputations. I want to know what Democrats stand behind this. I want to know what Democrats stand behind the clemency for Peltier. I want to know. I want to know what Democrats stand behind the protection of the January 6th committee members under whose oversight enormous amounts of information was destroyed. Enormous amounts of information was destroyed. I want to know what Democrats stand behind this. Chip Roy, our buddy, he says the implication is that they needed them. And he called on Congress to demand the truth. Hours before leaving office, you know what he did with these preemptive pardons. These public servants have served our nation with honor, said the dim-witted Biden. But Chip Roy says, implication is they needed the pardon, so let's call them all before Congress and demand the truth. And he's exactly right. They don't have any Fifth Amendment protection since they've gotten a pardon. If they refuse or lie, let's test the constitutional reach of these pardons with regard to their future actions. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis agreed. He said, absolutely, I've agreed with this, too. I believe it ought to be done. Look, the pardons are constitutional. The question is the extent of them here, and they need to be tested because no president has ever issued as many pardons in the history of our country. No president's pardoned a family member, let alone his entire family. They show up for Thanksgiving. You look around the table, they've all been pardoned, Mr. Producer. What do you make of that? Andrew Huff, author of The Truth About Wuhan, How I Uncovered the Biggest Lie in History, told Breitbart News earlier this month a pardon of Fauci would incriminate everyone, adding the acceptance of a pardon is an admission of guilt of the crimes.
Mark Levin.
Making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
We had this period with Joe Biden, America, where we never heard from the president, or we did, and he didn't make sense, or he's reading these note cards, or whatever it is. It's just an absolute disastrous mess. Now we have the opposite, a president who likes to talk to the press, who likes to talk to the American people, exquisitely competent in his language, what he's conveying, and certainly in the early days of an administration, exciting, new things going on. He just announced this A1 project, $500 billion, AI, I meant. AI, A1. Isn't that a A1 sauce? Yeah. This AI project, and it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. He can talk about the water in California, the smell. I mean, he's moving around from subject to subject, and he's being hammered by this one press guy that keeps saying, you know, these people that you pardoned, including people who attack police officers, you know, do you support the police and so forth? And he said to the guy, you know, he basically said to the guy, he said, look, you've got prosecutors who don't put people in jail for murdering people. You got Biden, who commuted the sentences of all kinds of criminals. Didn't say murders, but we know what he meant. And so forth and so on. And I find this interesting myself. Last night I focused on what nobody else was focusing on, this guy, Peltier, who was charged and convicted of participating in the cold-blooded murder of two FBI agents who were hurt, and they shot them in the head. And he's been in prison for decades, and there's always been this movement to get him out and so forth and so on. And one of the last commutations given by Biden was to him, in addition to his family and so forth, and the J6 committee members. We've never seen anything like this before. Never. We've just never seen anything like this before. And the media didn't seem all that worked up about it. They started to print some stories and so forth, but the bottom line is, that's serious. That's serious. President Trump said, I don't support people who attack cops, but a lot of these guys have already served years in prison. And some of them got ridiculous numbers of years in prison, and some of them, I would argue, who are accused of attacking cops actually didn't attack cops. But there are some who did. There's no question about it. But these commutations for murders of the most horrendous kind, one man kidnaps two sisters, brutally rapes both of them, and they're like 12, 13 years old, 11 years old, and then murders them in a brutal way. He got a commutation, and I can go through the whole list. So the media are the media. That is corrupt, partisan, and I don't think that's ever going to change, but for a handful of them. But for a handful of them. And we have all this hypocrisy. Adam Schiff, Chuck Schumer, all the rest of them, Democrats, talking about preemptive pardons. Preemptive pardons. Their media, preemptive pardons. All of them against it. Strongly against. I want you to listen. It's important to hold these people to account. It's important. And our friends at Grabian, hat tip on their montage. This is from 2020, okay? 2020. When they were attacking Trump, and Trump shouldn't do this, and Trump shouldn't do that. Cut to, go.
Have you ever heard of somebody getting a preemptive pardon who was innocent of all crime? Who's just an innocent person?
This is the America's bigot, isn't it, Joy Reid? Certainly sounds like her. Go ahead.
They get pardoned, and they're an innocent person.
But no, it's the president's own family. It's people that have been covering up for the president in addition to his own family.
Is there an innocent explanation for someone to seek preemptive pardons for family members? Would you do that if you knew you were innocent and just worried about outside forces?
The answer to that is going to be no. If you haven't done anything wrong, you sit there and go, what do you need a preemptive pardon for?
If he pardons people preemptively, he's essentially telling the public that these people have committed crimes.
These are the attacks on Trump.
They are.
By the way, he didn't preemptively pardon anybody. Go ahead.
Pardon is clear evidence that crimes have been committed.
I imagine if he decides to issue these preemptive pardons, it will be cast in a way that he's protecting his family and protecting their reputations from, villainous exterior forces that are against him.
First off, we should just take a deep breath and acknowledge the audacity of a president who's so clearly concerned about his own criminal culpability mentality and that of his family members that pardons are a major obsession with him.
The idea of a kind of prospective pardon, this sort of permanent federal get-out-of-jail-free card, that seems to be what we're talking about in the case of this, right, with Giuliani and his 3 eldest children who, as far as we know, have not been convicted of a crime. Maybe they've committed a lot, and they don't want to face action. I don't know. It's weird. I wouldn't ask for a pardon. I don't think I deserve one because I don't think I've done anything criminal. But, like, where does that come from, that concept that you can just kind of wave your magic pardon wand?
We have Tish James. We have Xavier Becerra. Mimi Roca is literally my DA in my town. There will be opportunities to prosecute these people regardless if they abuse the pardon power as they are thinking.
Hopefully, Ellie, there will be a skyfall on this entire crime family, and there will be another day for them to die.
The president does indeed pardon, let's say, Giuliani or any members of his family. Would you see that, and I asked Preet Bharara this question, as essentially an admission of guilt?
I certainly would view it that way. I think millions of Americans would view it that way. If there was no belief in criminality, why would he think a pardon was necessary?
CNN has learned President Biden will pardon his son Hunter Biden.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? And the corrupt media, it's just sickening. And that's why you despise them, and you should. And Biden on CNN, December 2020. Oh, he's all cocky. He's coming into the White House, you know, and they're worried about Trump with pre-pardons. Again, there were no pre-pardons. There will be probably next time. Because now Biden has set a precedent. Just as Biden set a precedent with all these early executive orders. Did 90 of them or something in the first few days. Trump said, okay, I can outdo that. You notice when Trump came in 2017, he didn't do extensive executive orders. He did them now. The Democrats burned down these traditions. They opened the pathway to these sort of things, and then they complain about them. Here's Biden, cut one from fake Jake Tapper. Go.
President Trump is reportedly considering a wave of preemptive pardons. Does this concern you? All these preemptive pardons?
Well, it concerns me in terms of what kind of precedent it sets and how the rest of the world looks at us as a nation of laws and justice. You're not going to see in our administration that kind of approach to pardons. Nor are you going to see in our administration the approach to making policy by tweets. It's just going to be a totally different way in which we approach the justice system.
Yeah, totally different way, you fraud, you phony, you fake. Just a constant liar, a psychopath. And the media go right along with him, high and low, it doesn't matter. Then look at him, he's given more pardons and commuted more sentences than any president in American history, probably more than any 10 presidents in American history combined. And the most loathsome kind of people, murderers. Murderers. He gives all these pardons to his family, and I want to reiterate again, I want to underscore this point, it's important. He did it to protect himself. He pardoned his son the way he pardoned him to protect himself. He's pardoning his family members the way he's done it to protect himself. That's what he's done. I would also say to the media, you're worried about the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. I'm not a special pleader for either in any respect, any way, any day, period. But here you have people who've murdered people having their sentences commuted. Murdered people having their sentences commuted. What, there should have been Oath Keepers and then Proud Boys and then he wouldn't have commuted their sentences? Is that about right, Mr. Producer? I mean, perspective is everything. Context is everything. And I'm quite serious about this. And the fact that Joe Biden sold his office, sold it, especially as vice president, but he sold his office. Now that is a crime against society. That's a crime against your country. He did these pre-pardons, these so-called preemptive pardons, because he needed to. Because he needed to. Because he knows what his family members did. He knows how they were all enriched. And yes, there's efforts and there's ways to try and to scheme this and deal with it, but none of which will be satisfactory or bring anything close to full justice. So he's created this precedent now for mass preemptive pardons. There have been preemptive pardons in the past, but nothing like this. Very specific to history, like a Ford for Nixon. Completely understandable. We've talked about these. Washington did some for a significant group of individuals and so forth. Biden did it for family members. Nobody's ever done that. He did it for all of his family members. All of them. I mean, not distant relatives, but the close circle. Think about that. He used the office of the presidency to make money, the office of the vice presidency to make money, and then he uses the office of the presidency to cover his tracks. That's what he did. Then you have this Marxist, Jamie Raskin, who was on the January 6th committee. He's on MSNBC, and listen to this. Cut 3, go.
Did you accept your pardon, and would you advise your staff to accept theirs?
Well, I'm not even sure that's part of the process. I'm trying to connect up with a lawyer to figure out whether you accept or reject a pardon.
Let me help you out, dummy, Mr. Constitutional Expert. I think it's the Soviet Constitution, not the American Constitution. You've been pardoned by the president, so the federal government will not pursue you. But if you say, I reject that, and you go into court, and the Department of Justice is free to pursue me, then the Department of Justice will pursue you. You can be voluntarily pursued. Now, it's never happened before, but there's nothing that prevents it. As the individual who receives the pardon, you can reject the pardon. You're not required to accept the pardon. In fact, we have 2 individuals who had their death sentences commuted, and they said, no, we reject those commutations because we're challenging the conviction, period. So they're throwing the dice, and they rejected it. So yes, Raskin, I'll be your lawyer, you dumb bastard, and I'll do it for nothing. And you should announce today. You should go on your favorite network, MSLSD or the Constipated News Network, wherever you want to go, Pravda, Al Jazeera. Announce at the top of your lungs, I reject the pardon. If the Justice Department under Donald Trump wants to pursue me, then go at it. Say it! Say it, you chicken! Say it! You creep! You jerk!
Mark Levin.
You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
Mr. Producer, you're from and live in New York. Open your microphone. When those illegal immigrants, those Venezuelan gang members, attacked our NYPD police officers, how much time did they get in prison?
They were out the next day, I believe.
They were out the next day. Sure seemed like it.
Quick.
And this is going on all over the country. And this reporter, who we think is Peter Alexander, with the New York Slimes, NBC News, excuse me. Same thing. This was the focus. The media didn't focus on the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people who were thrown in prison for really misdemeanors. It was almost an assembly line process that was taking place here. It was horrendous. And they wanted to expand it even further, just anybody who walked onto the Capitol lawn for trespassing. That's what that U.S. attorney who was appointed by Biden said. I mean, this is horrendous. So, maybe not in every instance. I mean, it's impossible to really go through every single one of them, but certainly the overwhelming majority of the instances, justice was done. If it wasn't done in a case here or there, I understand, but I think for most of us, we understand what took place here. And, it'd be very different if the Justice Department was very selective and careful in who it pursued, and wouldn't even be that big of an issue. But when you start rounding up hundreds and hundreds, nearly 2,000 people, and you're still rounding them up, and it's the same Department of Justice that went after old ladies peacefully protesting at abortion clinics and Planned Parenthood, and mothers and fathers who were challenging school boards, and the teachers union working with the Department of Justice, a.k.a. the Department of Injustice, decided to bring down the Soviet hammer on them. And the instances are multifold of the abuses of power and civil liberties. I mean, you have a president here that signed an executive order to abolish all these abuses of civil liberties and free speech at the Department of Homeland Security and anywhere else in the federal government. That is unusual. I noticed Peter Alexander didn't mention that either. But it's glad to know he's pro-cop now, pro-law enforcement, pro-border security. Over 13,000 murders have been left into this country. Illegal aliens. Tens of thousands of rapists, 500,000 criminals. 500,000 criminals. And this was done purposely, with an open border. 100,000 or more dying every year from fentanyl. Open border. The highest level of slavery since the end of the Civil War, with women sold into slavery on the border, the raping, the torture, little kids sold into slavery, and pornography, and on and on and on. And this is the best they can do? It's not going to fly. It's just not going to fly. I'll tell you what. One of the finest public servants we have is this Elise Stefanik. One of the finest there is. Gutsy, smart, got a Harvard degree, and still came out of there a conservative. She's young. She's moving up the ladder quickly. Not just because she's interested in rising through the ranks. It's because she's a star. And she was testifying as for the position of ambassador to the United Nations. And she comes up against this guy, Chris Van Hollen. Chris Van Hollen is an Islamist. He's a Democrat Party Islamist. I love the way they always say, no, we don't favor terrorism, but. There are no buts. He's an Islamist. His wife apparently has a big influence on him. He's an Israel hater. He's a Netanyahu hater. That's what he is. This guy Van Hollen, he's a puke. He's a reprobate. And he tries to take on Stefanik. I want you to hear a little bit of this, as we will others, and we're going to get to Pete Hegseth in a moment. Probably in the next hour. Cut 7, go.
I asked you in my office also about whether Palestinians have the right of self-determination. My understanding was you said yes. Do you have a different answer today?
That was not the direct question that we discussed. I said the Palestinian people...
You believe that Palestinians have the right of self-determination?
I believe the Palestinian people deserve so much better than the failures that they've had
we agree
from
on
terrorist
that.
leadership.
It's just a pretty simple question.
And I believe we need
I take it,
peace in the region. Of course they deserve human rights.
So...
I want to ensure that, number one, we bring the hostages home.
So do all of us. Representative Stefanik, let me just ask you.
No, all of you don't, actually. All of you don't. Your constant attacks on Israel, the government of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, your constant use of Hamas propaganda data, your constant use of blood libels against the Jewish population and the Jewish leadership in Israel. No, you don't all want the hostages to come back. You simply don't. You pretend you do, but you don't. Go ahead.
Rarely surprised by answers in my office, but I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry,
Smotrich. This is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that...
Now, understand. For context, you know this, you listen to this program. The entire so-called West Bank is Judea and Samaria. In 1948, the Jordanians stole the big chunks of Judea and Samaria. The birthplace of Judaism is Judea, in a town called Shiloh. It long predates the city of David, which predates Jerusalem. This is where the tribes met. This is where Samuel was, as I've learned. this is the birthplace of Judaism. It's in the Bible. What we Jews call the Torah. It's there. And so for him to ask this question, do you believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank, is to ask the Jews if they have a right to their own faith. Is to ask the Jews if they accept the fact that their faith was born in Judea, in this tiny little town, which, of course, the Palestinians claim as their own. Well, that's okay. They claim New York City and L.A. as their own, too, but that's beside the point. And so here you have this Democrat Party Islamists, this senator from Maryland, who could get elected no matter what he does. We're worried about Elon Musk. Did he give that Hitler salute? Elon Musk, who went to Auschwitz. Elon Musk, who went to Israel after October 7, met with Netanyahu. Elon Musk, who says 3/4 of his friends are Jewish. He has an affinity. He has an identity with the Jewish people, despite all the rest. Does it sound like this man does? Does it sound like he does? This Van Hollen, this Islamist? He would deny the Jews their birthplace, the birthplace of Judaism? Is there another faith on the face of the earth? Is there another minority on the face of the earth that is treated this way? Whether it's Native Americans here or whatever it is. None. So he asks Stefanik, Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank? And in that conversation, you told me that? Yes, you shared the view. Is that your view today? Like he's shocked. You serious? The Jews want to stay in their ancestral homeland? The whole language, the West Bank. There is no West Bank unless it's the East Bank of Israel. There are no settlers in their own home. Do we call the Native Americans settlers in their own home? You can't be a settler in your historic homelands. The occupiers are the Palestinians who are trying to take Judea, Samaria, and the entirety of not just biblical Israel, all of Israel, because they want to exterminate the Jews. That's why. They've said it many times. Go ahead.
Shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
Yes. Got it, pal? Yes. And you and your Islamist buddies can stick it. Cut 8, go.
If you look at the anti-Semitic rot within the United Nations, there are more resolutions targeting Israel than any other country, any other crisis combined. And we have significant national security councils, the anti-Semitism, whether it's UN Women failing to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack and terrorist regime against innocent civilian women, using rape and targeting women, specifically taking them hostage. I am overjoyed that those 3 young women hostages were returned home. We need to stay committed to ensuring every hostage is brought home. I've met with many hostage families. This position, we need to be a voice of moral clarity on the UN Security Council and at the United Nations at large, for the world to hear the importance of standing with Israel. And I intend to do that. This year will mark the 50th year since the disgraceful Zionism is racism resolution at the United Nations. And at the time, our U.S. Ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, spoke out strongly against that disgraceful resolution. That is the type of leadership that I hope to bring, if confirmed, to the United Nations. And President Trump has a tremendous record when it comes to standing with Israel, whether it's the Abraham Accords, whether it's his commitment to combating anti-Semitism, or recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. This is a strong, strong record, and I hope to do that at the UN if confirmed.
And that's why he hates her. I'd be surprised if he votes for her.
Mark Levin.
The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
The Hate America attorneys general in blue states The Hate America press, well, they want you to believe that birthright citizenship is right there in the Constitution. I've even heard some of our friends on cable and on radio say it's in the Constitution, it's going to be tough to turn this around. It's not in the Constitution. It's not anywhere in the Constitution. It's not in the history of the 14th Amendment. In fact, quite the contrary. The author of the 1866 Civil Rights Act, the first of the Civil Rights Acts in American history and after the Civil War, had a lot of influence on the makeup of the 14th Amendment and specifically said it had nothing to do with aliens. We have a Supreme Court decision at the end of the 18th century, which I'll get into as well. Stick with me. Our problem is going to be activist judges and justices. Unfortunately, now most judges and justices are activists, even the ones, in many instances, who claim to be originalists, to be reading the text of the Constitution. Or they fall back to the position that the country's gotten used to this, and we don't want to create a radicalization of any policy position, and so forth and so on. Why don't you just read the Constitution and, damn it, just follow it? You're a judge. And so this is already prepared to attack. They want to get a temporary restraining order on President Trump's executive order. Our friend Alan Dershowitz has said an executive order cannot reverse a constitutional amendment. Of course, it's not in the Constitution, so an executive order should be effective enough to end it. But I tell you again, this won't be about what the Constitution actually says. There will be an activist effort. I hope it fails, but it may well succeed, to try and pretend that the Supreme Court has created precedent and try and pretend it's always been there and then say we're not going to reverse course. It would be so inhumane rather. There's nothing in the Constitution about birthright citizenship. The idea that if you're just born in the United States, you're a citizen is a sham, and it's always been a sham. Democrats and the media claim it comes from the 14th Amendment, and they're lying. I've talked about that here on Fox, on Blaze, how even on Meet the Depressed, the phony moderator, another left-wing Democrat dressed up as a journalist, in a $12 dress. She only read part of the language in the 14th Amendment to mislead everybody who was watching Meet the Depressed, which is why I tell you, why watch Meet the Depressed? What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment? Well, what were the purposes of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? And why do we call them the post-Civil War amendments? They were specifically aimed at the just freed black slaves, no longer slaves. They were amendments passed to ensure the rights and privileges that every American enjoys would now be enshrined in our Constitution to protect and promote citizenship for black people, because we still had states that were resisting. And I must remind you that 3/4 of the House and Senate, 3/4 of the states are necessary to ratify a constitutional amendment, and that's what they did. And if some of these southern states or Confederate states hadn't voted for it, they were not going to be allowed back into the Union. The 1866 Civil Rights Act came before the 14th Amendment, and the 1866 Civil Rights Act was the precursor to the 14th Amendment, conveying equal rights, the right to vote, and so forth and so on the newly freed black individuals who had been black slaves. The problem was, after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson was president. He was a Democrat. He actually supported the Civil War, but he was not big on conferring equal rights on black people. And so Congress, which was made up of a significant majority in the House and Senate of Republicans who had supported abolition and so forth, they passed the 1866 Civil Rights Act. Johnson resisted it. He wasn't going to enforce it. And they passed it over his objections. Thus, the people who were behind the Civil Rights Act of 1866, they decided we need to amend the Constitution. In addition to the 13th and 15th Amendments that they had already been developing, thus came the 14th Amendment, applying due process and equal protection to black people that already existed in the 5th Amendment of the Constitution, but applying it to the states through the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, the relevant clause that we're talking about here, was intended to ensure that black people were emancipated in every respect as citizens of the United States. It had nothing to do with immigration, legal or illegal. It never came up. In fact, that's not correct. The one time it came up, it was dismissed as irrelevant. That's the legislative history. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, that's what we're talking about. Congress shall have power to establish uniform rules of naturalization, okay? Congress has never passed a federal statute that confers birthright citizenship. Never. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in federal law. It's not in the legislative history. And yet here it is. Why? Because Democrats, some Republicans, the bureaucracy, they see birthright citizenship as a means to an end. Birthright citizenship is the argument, is the position, is the policy the Democrat Party holds on to because they want monopoly power for all time. They don't care if it's foreigners or not. They don't care if it's foreigners or not. And that's why you have these state attorneys general bringing the cases that they're bringing to try and stop it. They're going to form shop, try and get a district court that'll help them. District court, they're looking for a temporary restraining order nationwide from one federal judge. These federal district judges, I think there's 1,000 or 1,100 of them. They just need one. Then you go through the appellate process and so forth. And so that's what they're going to be doing the entire time. This is going to be a tough one because of the mindset of the judiciary and the fact that so many people are affected by this. I mean, what the court could do, if it wants to be practical as opposed to constitutional, is say from this point forward there is no birthright citizenship, that it has been conveyed and conferred on individuals who are already here and they've relied on it. That would be better than nothing. As they say, half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. Right? So, what does the relevant section of your Constitution, the 14th Amendment, say about citizenship? Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So what is this phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof? It sounds like our courts, our Congress, the media, the ethnic front groups, all pretend it doesn't exist, or they try and interpret it in a way that makes it useless. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That's not what it says. It says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, when this was originally ratified, they excluded American Indians. That is, individuals who lived in this country, Native Americans who they didn't consider, quote-unquote, citizens of America because they were citizens of a tribe. That's how they interpreted jurisdiction thereof. Can you imagine people coming into this country, as an example, illegally having children? That their amendment would be so spun, so twisted to apply to that? It doesn't apply to that. It was intended to effectively reverse the Dred Scott decision of 1857. That basically held that slaves or black Americans from African descent would never be eligible for U.S. citizenship because they're black. This amendment was aimed at fixing that once and for all. But it was never intended to be a blank a blank board for anybody who comes into the country, happens to have a kid or purposely has a kid, and all of a sudden, oh, you're in the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, some of you might think, well, legally they are in the jurisdiction of the United States. That's not what they meant either. Jurisdiction meaning allegiance to the United States. Part of the system of the United States. That's what they meant by jurisdiction. So if you have diplomats who visit the United States and they happen to have children here, nobody claims that they're automatically American citizens. If you're a tourist and you come to the United States, you happen to have a child here, nobody's claiming they're automatically American citizens. So why would we say that if you're an illegal immigrant who comes to the United States and have a child here, that's automatically a birthright citizen? Notice, birthright citizens, that phrase doesn't even exist. Was never uttered. Had nothing to do with this amendment. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The jurisdiction thereof. If you're here illegally and you have a child, you don't get to determine. It's not like I get to unilaterally determine that I'm subject to the jurisdiction of the United States any more than a diplomat does or a tourist does or somebody on a student visa does or anything of the kind. And they have a child. And so there's literally nothing that supports this. Nothing. Zero. Now, so the Trump administration has put together an executive order that reads as follows. By the authority vested in me as president by the constitutional laws of the United States, it is hereby ordered, Section 1, purpose. The privilege of United States citizenship is a priceless and profound gift. 14th Amendment states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That provision rightly repudiated the Supreme Court of the United States' shameful decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1857, which misinterpreted the Constitution as permanently, as I said, excluding people of African descent from eligibility for U.S. citizenship solely based on their race. But the 14th Amendment has never been interpreted to extend citizenship universally to everyone born within the United States. It has always excluded from birthright citizenship persons who were born in the United States but not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, quote unquote. So consistent with this understanding, the Congress has further specified through legislation that, quote, a person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a national, a citizen of the United States at birth, generally mirroring the 14th Amendment's text. Now, among the categories of individuals born in the U.S. and not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the privilege of the United States citizenship does not automatically extend to persons born in the United States. One, when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth, that is a child of illegal aliens. Two, when that person's mother's presence in the United States at the time of said person's birth was lawful but temporary, such as, but not limited to, visiting the United States under the auspices of a visa waiver program. This is what I just pointed out. Or visiting on a student, work, or tourist visa. And the father was not a United States citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth. The policy, Section 2. It is the policy of the United States that no department or agency of the United States shall issue documents regarding United States citizenship or accept documents issued by state, local, or other governments or authorities purporting to recognize U.S. citizenship to persons when that person's mother was unlawfully present, and they go through the same routine. Mother means the immediate female biological progenitor, they write. Father means the immediate male biological progenitor. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority, and it goes on. So it's a straightforward executive order. Again, our friend Alan Dershowitz, a great guy, smart as hell. When he says you can't reverse an amendment with an executive order, yes, but you can reverse a non-supported practice with an executive order, and that's what we're talking about here. It's not in the Constitution. It never has been. Unless a court or the Supreme Court rewrites the Constitution in the 14th Amendment and includes it in there. And I'm sick and tired of these courts amending our Constitution. We have an amendment process, two of them. They're very difficult, but they exist. And it doesn't include judges or even a group of justices amending the Constitution. There is no birthright citizenship in our governing document of any kind, in our legislative history of any kind, in any statute whatsoever.
Mark Levin.
We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
There was a fantastic point made, I thought, on the internet. Let's see, who was this? Give the man his due. Michael P. Preemptive. He makes a fantastic point. What does he say? He says, if we can threaten allies and neighbors with tariffs, you would think we could threaten Qatar with sanctions for funding terrorists that killed Americans. You know, a tool to get Doha to course correct. Why is Qatar special? I think that's an enormously important question. In fact, I think it's a great question. And I would ask this, to further elaborate on the gentleman's point, why don't we put tariffs on Qatar? Why don't we put tariffs on Qatar and Saudi Arabia? Qatar for funding Hamas, as he mentioned, which murdered American citizens, and Saudi Arabia for ripping us off on oil prices, helping drive up the cost of gasoline for all of you, all Americans. Saudi Arabia has a huge part in that. If it's good enough for our allies, it's good enough for these two Arab countries, don't you think, America? So we will lead the effort here, because we like the word tariffs too, certainly under certain circumstances. Qatar should be tariffed for giving $1.8 billion to Hamas, for protecting its leaders. Hamas, which murdered American citizens. Qatar should be tariffed. If we tariff allies, many of whom deserve it, certainly Qatar deserves to be tariffed. And by the way, the Qatar official media are now asserting, go to memri.org, one of my favorite sites, memri.org. They interpret all the Arabic, so you don't have to. Qatar, listen to this, Qatar is celebrating the deal as a victory for Hamas. Right there, it's in writing. I want you to take a look at it. Hamas, which murdered American citizens. Hamas, which was given $1.8 billion by Qatar. We have our heads so far up Qatar's ass, it's not even funny. Why aren't we putting tariffs on Qatar? Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is driving up the cost of oil and gasoline in this country, including winter heating fuel. Many of us are freezing right now. They're driving up the cost of oil. They're driving up the cost of gasoline at the pump that you're paying for. That's not the only reason, but they are a reason. They're part of an oligopoly of Arab countries, Arab oil-producing countries. We never hear about this. We never talk about it. Rather than kissing Saudi Arabia's ass, shouldn't we be tariffing Saudi Arabia too? Despite the fact we still don't have all the facts about them behind 9/11, I'm quite serious about all of this. So let's put tariffs on Qatar. Let's put tariffs on Saudi Arabia. Now, that's my recommendation to the administration. To be at least consistent, to actually be more than consistent. Look how Saudi Arabia is ripping us off on the price of fuel. They're ripping us off. One of the ways that we can bring a lot of money into our country is to put tariffs on Saudi Arabia. That's all. The balance of trade with Saudi Arabia is completely out of sync. They're ripping us off. You know, our country makes deals with them. Tariff them. I'm for it. Tariff Qatar. Qatar, which funded Hamas, which killed American citizens. Tariff them. What do you think of that, Mr. Producer? It's a great idea. Right? Yeah. We can get lots of money in here, too. These are two, basically, dictatorships, monarchical dictatorships. They're sitting on a flood of oil. Yes. And you're paying for the whole damn thing. You, we, the American people. We're paying through the nose. And so at a minimum, I think we should heavily tariff them. I like the idea that the gentleman had. I'm just expanding it. I think President Trump's onto something. I really do. I just think that the Trump administration should expand it to cover Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And I passed that along to them as a positive suggestion. Now, Iran, if I'm reading correctly, and I don't know that it's accurate, so I want to say that right now. They're anonymous leaks, supposedly from within the administration. There's an element now within the administration. They call themselves restrictors. I never heard of it. You never heard of it. The American people never heard of it. It's sort of a small cabal of very strange individuals, with Elridge Colby and a few of these other guys. Now, some of them are so extreme, they just believe that the United States should not be engaged, really, in any type of support for military activity, even with our allies. And the Koch Soros Quincy Institute, and Koch has also set up something else. I think he calls it defense something or other. And these individuals, some of them are secreting their ways into the Pentagon before Pete Hegseth gets there. And they say, look, the Middle East is not our problem. Israel's not our problem. At least this fella, Eldridge Colby, believes communist China's a problem, but some of them say, nah, it's not a problem. They take Taiwan. It's none of our business. No big deal. Now, these people are going to get us slaughtered. These people are going to bring us World War III. There's no appeasing evil. There's no appeasing Hitler. There was no appeasing Stalin. There's no appeasing Iran. Appeasement doesn't work. It just doesn't. Even though there's a big ocean, they have what's called jets and bombers and hypersonic missiles and nuclear weapons and killer satellites. See what I mean? This isn't Christopher Columbus, America. This is 2024, 2025 America. There's things called technology out there now. And some of this technology is absolutely frightening, as a matter of fact. And so some of them support Iran. Some of them support Iran. Some of them say we shouldn't be providing anything to the state of Israel. We shouldn't be providing anything to Ukraine. Even if those countries purchase it on their own. Just stay out of it. Stay out of it. We've had enough of these forever wars. This is about as stupid as it gets. We don't create forever wars. The enemy does. The enemy does. You can have short wars, too, by the way, Mr. Producer. With nuclear weapons, they're over in about 15 minutes. Is that preferred? I don't think so. You see, when it comes to foreign policy, here's the deal. You shouldn't be an ideologue. You shouldn't be an ideologue. Forever wars, no wars. Interventionist, restrictionists. Foreign policy, as I wrote at length in Liberty and Tyranny, should be based on what? Prudence. Prudence. Judgment based on the facts at the time. It's not ideological that in all cases you do X and in all cases you do Y, unless, of course, we're attacked, then we know what we do in all cases. But you folks understand. Donald Trump understands. One of the reasons he's talking about the Panama Canal as ours is because communist China controls both ends of it. And as he points out, we didn't build it at the loss of 38,000 Americans and God knows how much money for the communist Chinese. So he's saying we want to take it back. He's right. He looks at Greenland. He says, look at the steps that communist China and Russia are taking. They're threatening us even on Alaska. They're trying to take control of certain strategic points in the geography of the planet to choke us off. So Greenland, come join America. Donald Trump understands this. He's not one of these so-called restrictionists, but these guys are sort of squirreling their way into the system. And there's a number of articles that have been written about it and posted, and you can read it yourself. So it is concerning. It is concerning. And we bring this to your attention, and we bring it to the attention of the president and his allies and his friends who want him to succeed. God knows we do. We want him to be the greatest president in American history, and he's already heading in that direction. What he has done since he was inaugurated is unbelievable. It's unprecedented. It's historic. One of the things I do not want to happen on his watch, which I consider our watch, we the people who support Donald Trump, is for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. They didn't get it on Obama's watch. No, they didn't get it on Biden's watch. And I certainly don't want them to get it on President Trump's watch. And this is important because I don't know what to believe. I'm reading these conflicting stories. Again, leaks anonymous that he doesn't support taking military action against their nuclear sites, and yet he did support it not too long ago when Israel was defending itself. My attitude always is don't take anything off the table, and I don't believe he has taken anything off the table. So I don't know what to make of these leaks other than maybe it's the restrictionists. Maybe it's the restrictionists who are trying to push him into a corner. That's their name. They give it to themselves. I never heard of it before. But here's this piece from Reuters from yesterday. Iran is pressing the gas pedal on uranium enrichment, IAEA chief says. Now, the IAEA is the UN. They're no friends of ours. They've been special pleaders for the Islamo-Nazis in Iran, and they are banging the pots and pans, and they're saying to us, they're saying to the others in the West, hey, this country's on its back. It's economically spent. Its ground-to-air missile defense system was destroyed by the Israelis. The Israelis almost killed their ability to move gasoline around in their own country, even though they're an oil-producing country. And their answer is to get nukes as fast as they can. And if I heard correctly today, we're going to begin a negotiation or discussion process or something with the Iranians. Now, this has been going on since the Islamo-Nazis took over Iran back in the 70s. All administrations negotiate with it, and all administrations fail when they do. Obviously, Donald Trump is the best negotiator ever. Seriously. Really ever. But you're still dealing with a terrorist regime that is desperate to hang on. And so the United Nations organization that is responsible for overseeing their enrichment of uranium is saying, hey, they're accelerating it now. Now, I want you to read this. I want to read this to you because if Iran gets nukes, they have hypersonic missiles. And if they put nuclear warheads on it, you might say, well, we can shoot them out of the sky. What if we miss one? One. Remember, Iran now has a presence in our own hemisphere, in Central America. In Central America. They have a presence in Venezuela. Thank you, Joe Biden, for nothing. It says Iran is pressing the gas pedal on its enrichment of uranium to near weapons grade, UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi said today, adding that Iran's recently announced acceleration in enrichment was starting to take effect. Grossi said last month Iran had informed the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN, that it would dramatically accelerate enrichment of uranium to up to 60% purity, closer to the roughly 90% of weapons grade. And by the way, to get from 60% to 90% is a blink of an eye. Once you have hit that 60% number. Western powers called the step a serious escalation and said there was no civil justification for enriching to that level and that no other country had done so without producing nuclear weapons. Iran has said its program is entirely peaceful and has the right to enrich uranium to any level it wants. You believe that, America? Before it was producing more or less 7 kilograms of uranium, up to 60% per month. Now it's above 30 or more than that. So I think this is a clear indication of an acceleration. They are pressing the gas pedal, said Grossi to the World Economic Forum in Davos. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency yardstick, about 42 kilograms of uranium enriched to that level is enough in principle, if enriched further, for one nuclear bomb. Grossi said Iran currently had about 200, up to 60%. That's half a nuclear bomb, and they're almost there. It would take time to install and bring online the extra centrifuges, machines that enrich uranium, but that the acceleration was happening Now. We're going to start seeing steady increases from now on, he said. He called diplomacy with Iran, and the administration of President Trump has agreed. Well, let me suggest we better hurry the hell up if we're going to be yakking to these guys.